Και συνεχίζουμε με την επόμενη εισήγηση. Έχουμε τον κύριο Rodriguez Suarez από την Ισπανία, τα ακούσατε. Το θέμα του είναι κοδωνοκρουσίες στο Άγιον Όρος κατά την Οθωμανική περίοδο.
First of all, I would like to thank the Αγιορειτική Εστία for giving me the opportunity to present my research. It is a privilege to do it here in the city where I was an Erasmus student 13 years ago. The use of large bells to regulate the everyday life of the monastic community is a practice employed at all the monasteries on Mount Athos. Together with the traditional simandra, bell ringing is a significant part of the routine and soundscape of the Holy Mountain. Nevertheless, this aspect of Athonite monasticism has been so far overlooked, and in general, bells have not attracted much scholarly attention. The use of bells is assumed to have been widespread during the late Byzantine period. However, the lack of information about their use in Athonite monasteries before the Ottoman conquest only allows us to speculate. Surprisingly, most evidence concerning bell ringing on Mount Athos dates to the period of Ottoman rule, when the use of bells was strictly forbidden until the mid-19th century. In this paper, I'm going to present and discuss part of this evidence, a combination of written sources, archaeological remains, and artistic representations, in order to shed light on one of the most unexplored aspects of the history of the Athonite community. This research is a work in progress. I have just returned from Mount Athos, where I have looked at the bells currently employed in 13 of the 20 monasteries. I would like to thank all the monasteries that I visited during my 2-week field trip. They provided hospitality and allowed me to study their bells. Last but not least, I also want to thank the Mount Athos Foundation of America for having supported this project with their travel scholarship. The Ottoman conquest does not seem to have had any impact on bell ringing on Mount Athos. The Holy Mountain accepted Ottoman sovereignty in 1423, and just a few years later, in 1427, a massive bell tower was built at the monastery of Batopedi. Half a century later, however, textual sources indicate that the Ottoman authorities requisitioned the bells employed at the Athonite monasteries. A few brief references inform us that in 1491, bells were destroyed and bell ringing on Mount Athos came to a halt. We are not told about the reasons for this attack on Athonite practices. This may have been a one-off event, as later visitors to the Holy Mountain mention the use of bells. For instance, the French scholar Pierre Bellon, who visited Mount Athos in the mid-16th century, tells us that the monks have statues in relief and painted images, like the Latins, and also use bells. A century later, Leo Alatios, a Greek from Chios who converted to Catholicism and became keeper of the Vatican Library, reports that on Mount Athos are many bells, some of which are very old and strike the hours. In fact, John Cobell, the chaplain to the Levant Company and who visited Athos in 1677, informs us in his journal that the Labra monastery has a large clock with a great bell with Latin characters above 300 years old. If Cobell was right, and the bell was indeed that old, the instrument was cast in the 14th century, which means that all the bells had not been looted in 1491. More importantly, the Latin inscription suggests that the bell had been cast somewhere in the west. The other possibility is that the instrument had been produced in a nearby territory under Frankish rule. However, the evidence presented below suggests that the bell may have been cast in Venice In any case, this detail is significant because it shows that Athonite monasteries had imported bells from Western Europe since the Byzantine period. This is confirmed by another bell that Kobel saw at the monastery of Philotheu. The description of the instrument is very simple, and so we do not know if this was used in conjunction with a clock. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it. The description of the bell is here. It says a bell, and then it says Antonius, Magister, and then it says the date, which is, as you can see, 1416. Yeah, so Kobel recorded this inscription, which states that the bell was cast by a certain Magister Antonius in 1416. Antonius was a bell founder based in Venice and active between 1382 and 1423. Thus, a second Athonite monastery employed a bell cast by a Westerner and which also survived the Ottoman requisition in 1491. Kobel reports that at Batopedi are different simandra and several bells. This detail proves that the monastic community employed both simandra and bells to regulate its everyday life during the Ottoman period. Of the bells at Batopedi, Kobel says that they are little. He recorded the inscription on one of them. Again, this was in Latin. It was written in te, Domine speravi, which translates as in thee, O Lord, do I put my trust. This is a verse from Psalm 31. Kobel also informs us that this bell was from Poland. Frederick Hasluck realized that this was a mistake. The bell was probably a product of the De Polis foundry, which was established in Venice in 1453 and is still active today. Thus, this bell must have been imported into Athos at some point during the Ottoman period. Another bell from the same Venetian workshop was employed at Protaton until it broke in 1874. During my field trip, I have found at least 3 bells cast at the De Polis foundry. The one you can see here is an undated one that is still being used at Ilandar Monastery. You can see the inscription is here. It looks more or less like this. In fact, at this stage of the research, the oldest bell on Mount Athos was cast in Venice. Found at the Pantocrator Monastery and still being used, it is dated to 1622 and was cast by Zambattista Tonis, a master recorded in other bells found in Istria and Dalmatia. You can see here, it says Zan Battista Ton and F. Fekit. Now, all the bells discussed above do not include any details recording their destination. That is, the instruments do not show any information about who acquired them or in which monasteries they were going to be rung. It is probable that these artifacts were not commissioned, they were simply purchased to the workshop. Nevertheless, this seems to have changed in the 18th century, when we find the first instances of bells with inscriptions and decoration that actually refer to Mount Athos. This is one of them. This is a bell at Ibiron Monastery. It was cast in 1720, and it is today found in the clock tower, not in the bell tower. It is the product of Domenico Zambelli. I don't know if you can see it, it says Opus Dominici Zambelli. Yeah, and he is probably a master based in Venice. At the moment, it seems to be the earliest bell on Mount Athos to include a Greek inscription, which, as you can see, looks a bit odd. This is the omega, which looks actually like 2 O's together. The S is like the Latin S. Yeah, and the epsilon looks like a V. It gives the impression that the master who cast the bell struggled to reproduce some of the Greek letters, and so he employed a few ones from the Latin alphabet. The result is a Greek inscription with some letters transliterated. But the biggest surprise is this. One of the four images that decorates the bell shows the Virgin and Child and two angels crowning her. They are not very obvious, they are here, yeah? And the Virgin is labeled as the Mother of God, Miter Theou, yeah? The Mother of God Portaitissa, that is the very famous icon at Ibiron Monastery. The Greek inscription, together with the depiction of the famous icon, indicate that this bell was commissioned by either the monastery or someone who had contacts with its monks. Yeah, the pictures are not very good. In some cases, looking at these bells was not a very easy task. A few other 18th century bells were also commissioned, but bells continued to be imported into Mount Athos. In the end of the 18th century, however, a few bells were produced closer to Mount Athos. This is the case of two bells, one from Protaton and another from Ibiron. This is the one from Protaton, which is now cracked. 10 years ago, the bell tower burned down. And this is the one at Ibiron. The picture is not very good. I looked at the bells from Ibiron bell tower in the night. Now, these were cast by a certain Haralambis Micheletis. You can see a bit of his name here, Haralambis Micheletis, who in one of the bells describes himself as Kephalonitis, that is from Kephallonia. Both were cast in 1781. The fact that the first Greek bell master known to us was from Kephallonia should not be a surprise, I believe. The island was under Venetian rule from 1500s until 1797, and so it is possible that at some point during this period bell casting was introduced, or perhaps Micheletis went to Venice where he learned bell founding. Only in the 19th century, and after the Ottoman authorities allowed the use of bell ringing throughout the empire, bell founding is certainly recorded on Mount Athos. A certain Ioannis Nicolaou cast at least 7 bells between 1862 and 1888. Here you can see one of the two that he cast for the Labra Monastery in 1886. The name is not very clear. You can see it here, Ioannou Nicolaou. Yeah, and one of the images that decorates the bell shows standing figure, Oagios Athanasios, yeah, the founder of the monastery. Most of the bells cast by Ioannis Nicolaou have a depiction on the bells that refers to the monastery where they were going to be used. Now, in fact, the travel account by Athelstan Riley, who visited Athos in 1883, informs us that several bell founders were based in Carriers. After centuries of bells being imported, the production of bells was finally available in the Athonite Peninsula. In any case, as I said, bells continued to be imported from abroad. From the mid-19th century onwards, most bells that found their way to Mount Athos were actually cast in Russia. For instance, in the city of Rostov-on-Don, which is 32 kilometers from the Sea of Azov. The most famous bells from Russia on Mount Athos are to be found in the monastery of San Panteleimon and the city of San Andrew, both Russian foundations in the 19th century. At San Panteleimon, we have this massive, I guess you already know about it, this bell. It probably is the largest bell in Greece and was cast in Moscow during the reign of Tsar Alexander III, that is at some point between 1881 and 1894. The latter, that is the city of San Andrew, has this bell. Yeah, I only put a detail. Was donated by the Grand Duke of Russia, Alexei Alexandrovich, that is the brother of Alexander III, and this includes the symbol of Tsarist Russia, the double-headed eagle with the image of St. George in the center. Now, do these bells do these artifacts suggest that bell ringing was widespread on Mount Athos during the Ottoman period? Now, I'm going to use the account of Basil Grigorovich Barsky, who visited Athos twice in the first half of the 18th century, to see if we have more information regarding the use of bell ringing in the Holy Mountain. For instance, he informs us that at Labra are 2 bell towers, one on each side of the Catholicon. One of these has a clock that strikes loudly. In any case, both towers, we are told, contain bells. One tower has 2 bells and an iron cimandron, and the other has 2 more bells and a large wooden cimandron, the so-called now kopanon. Barsky also tells us that at Karakalu, the bell tower houses bells and wooden cimandra, and also made of iron, to announce the rules. Moreover, there is a clock which was then not working, but he tells us that there is another one inside the church. Now, describing the Catholicon of the Philotheu monastery, Barsky mentions a large striking clock on the top of the narthex. He mentions twice a clock at Ibiron Monastery, which is located on top of a tower built to the southwest side of the Catholicon. You can see it here with the famous Arapis. And we are told that it also strikes the hours, but not only that, he tells us that it has a large bell and 4 smaller ones. The smaller ones strike the quarters of the hour. Moreover, he says, in front of the church there is another tower. He tells us that it was built especially as a bell tower and has bells and both iron and wooden cimandra to announce the services. At Kutlumus, Barsky saw another large striking clock, and he also mentions that even though the monastery is poor, it has both cimandra and bells, which are kept in a bell tower built on the right-hand side of the church. That is more or less here. I don't know if you can see it through the window on the top. You can see the large wooden cimandron. So the fact that, I believe, Barsky says, okay, the monastery is poor, but it has these bells and cimandra. This detail demonstrates how necessary these instruments were for regulating the schedule of the community. Barsky mentions another large striking clock at Stavronikita. We are told that it is located on the east wall. And he says that there is also a bell tower with bells and cimandra. At Pantokrator, next to the narthex of the Catholicon, is a bell tower with a bell, singular, cimandra, and a clock. At Batopedi Monastery, Barsky mentions 2 towers, a bell tower and a small tower with a clock that strikes loudly. At Esphigmenou, Barsky describes a low bell tower over the narthex of the Catholicon. And at Zographou, the bell tower is on the eastern wall of the monastery. I'm not sure, but I believe this is probably the only depiction of a bell that I found in the sketches by Barsky. And also he saw a large striking clock at Zographou. At Seropotamou, he says there is a low bell tower with 3 small bells. And finally, at Dionysiou Monastery, Barsky describes the bell tower, which is located behind the church. Here, you can also see again, this is probably the wooden cimandron, and below, a bit bent, the iron cimandro. But Barsky tells us that the church has bells also to call for the service. Now, more visual evidence may provide details regarding the use of bells in other Athonite monasteries during the 18th century. A chapel dedicated to Ivan Rilsky, built and painted at Ilandar Monastery in 1757 at the expense of Hadzi Balko of Bansko. Inside the chapel there is a portrait of the Titor, who is holding a model of the chapel, and we can see that there is also a tower. I don't know if you can see it here. There are 3 different size bells, yeah? Did also Balko offer the bells? We don't know. But what is clear is that bells were not only purchased and commissioned by the monasteries. For instance, a bell cast in Buda, often, in German, in 1747 was offered to Batopedi Monastery by a certain George Karayanopoulos from Kozani and his wife. You can see part. This is actually a representation of the Annunciation, to which the Batopedi Monastery is dedicated. And here we can see the symbol, some sort of monogram of the Batopedi Monastery. This is a very interesting bell because it has inscriptions in both Greek and Latin, German. Now, I'm about to finish. Bells were considered such significant artifacts that in 1888 the monastery of Batopedi donated a bell to the village of Dobarsko, today in modern Bulgaria. The bell, which is broken today, as you can see, still shows a Greek inscription. It's not very obvious here, but it's on the top. This inscription tells us that the bell was a present meant to commemorate the ties between the village and the monastery. We do not know where the bell was cast, probably. Maybe the name of the master was on the lower part of the bell. But this special artifact demonstrates that once bell ringing was allowed by the Ottoman authorities, the instruments could also function as diplomatic gifts. Now, conclusions. From all this information, I hope it is obvious that during the Ottoman period, most Athonite monasteries employed bells in conjunction with simandra. These instruments were used to call both monks and pilgrims to service. Their function was to regulate the everyday life of monasteries. The fact that each monastery had bells and several types of simandra indicates that each instrument was used to signal different instructions and/or the importance of each day according to the liturgical calendar. However, in some occasions, monks used the two instruments, usually one after the other. Also, structures were built to hang these two instruments, and bell towers became a common element of the Athonite monastic architecture. Moreover, many monasteries had a clock, an artifact that functioned with a striking bell. This mechanical device regulated the time during day and night. Until the 19th century, these were probably imported from Western Europe. To conclude, bell ringing during the Ottoman period was an important part of the acoustic environment of Mount Athos. The use of bells was associated with two different aspects of monastic routine: the religious services and the passing of time, both certainly interconnected. The privileged and isolated situation of the Holy Mountain, together with the patronage that it received, allowed the Athonite monasteries to employ bells and striking clocks in a period in which both artifacts were neither allowed nor common in the Ottoman Empire. While bells were considered to be a sign of freedom, the striking clocks, which were only employed in some Turkish cities of the European provinces, could be seen as a sign of Western culture. Therefore, bell ringing should be considered a key feature of Athonite monasticism during the Ottoman period. In fact, its research is still in its infancy. Written sources may provide more information about their use, while the study of the numerous Russian bells present on Mount Athos promises to uncover many details about the history of the Holy Mountain in the 19th century. In general, the instruments offer information about patronage and commercial contacts, and so they can help us to write the history of the Athonite community during the Ottoman period. I am hoping that the bells will be taken more seriously as artistic and historical artifacts. Finally, if you already know of a reference or ever come across any, I would really appreciate if you would let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Δεν είχαμε ακούσει πολλά πράγματα για καμπάνες στο Άγιον Όρος. Εγώ θεώρησα ότι θα είχαμε κοδωνοκρουσίες, γιατί μιλάμε για bell ringing, αλλά δεν ακούσαμε για bell ringing, ακούσαμε για καμπάνες. Παρακαλώ, ερωτήσεις. Δεν βλέπω ερωτήσεις. Όλοι έχουμε όμως ακούσει τις καμπάνες, οι κύριοι τουλάχιστον, οι κυρίες, λυπάμαι πολύ που δεν ακούτε τις καμπάνες του Αγιορείτικου. Και είναι υπέροχες πραγματικά. Παρακαλώ, ο κύριος Φέδων.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Ήταν πάρα πολύ ωραία η ομιλία. Εμπεριστατωμένη. In English? He does understand, I know. Δύο ερωτήσεις ήθελα. Αν όντως αυτή η βενετσιάνικη καμπάνα της Μονής Παντοκράτορος είναι τελικά η παλιότερη υπάρχουσα στο Όρος, μετά από όλη αυτή την έρευνα, αν έχετε καταλήξει κάπου. Και δεύτερον, για το καμπαναριό της Βατοπεδίου, που λέγεται ότι η οροφή, η στέγη είναι αρχική. Αν αυτή η μεγάλη καμπάνα, που είναι η πιο ψηλά από όλες, η αυστριακή, θα μπορούσε να τοποθετηθεί εκεί, παραμένοντας η στέγη αρχική στη θέση της, ή αν είναι η υπάρχουσα, αν είναι αντίγραφο της παλιάς ή κάτι άλλο. Αν μπορείτε να έχετε μια άποψη σχηματίσει για αυτό το θέμα μετά την έρευνα. Ευχαριστώ.
I will answer in English if that is okay. Now about the bell from Venice in Pantocrator Monastery. I didn't go to all the monasteries, so we don't know if it's actually the oldest one. Plus, there are some bells that are not dated, so this makes a bit difficult to know if one undated bell may be older. This thing you can see here, I believe to be quite old, but I'm hoping that someone who can read what I believe to be Old Slavonic can help me. By its shape, I believe also to be very old. Hopefully, I don't have more pictures, so this is what there is. This is from Dochieriu Monastery, where I was not allowed to see the bells in the bell tower or take pictures of the other little bells. But anyway, this about the bell, maybe the oldest bell in Pantocratoros. Now, the bell tower of Batopedi Monastery, it's difficult to say. You believe, you've told me before, I think that the roof of the Pantocrator bell tower was removed at some point, and this is how one of the biggest bells, Batopedi. I don't know, sometimes I didn't have a lot of time inside the bell towers. I had to rush to take pictures. There are two really big bells at Batopedi Monastery. One is very high, but I think it's the same size as another one that is lower. Both were cast in Vienna. I think removing the roof of the bell tower is a big enterprise just to have the two bells inside. But maybe, I don't know, we should... I don't think they go through the staircase. So the only way is either removing the roof or through the windows at the very top. I don't know if it's possible to have had one of the columns in the arches removed for a while. I don't know. I know of a case back home near Barcelona in which a church, they had this massive bell and they made one of the windows bigger for a while to have the bell going in. But yeah, I don't know. After all, I'm not an architect, but it's a possibility. After all, it was not only one, it was two. Maybe it was worth. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question.
Ο κύριος Χρυσογοίδης, στο μικρόφωνο.
thank you for all this information you gave us for the bells of Mount Athos. One question: when you mean the oldest bell, this of Pantocrator with question mark, of course, what do you mean? The
extant that we still have.
It is certain that in this date this bell was in the monastery, or it was constructed. Because
I said it's the oldest extant belt on Mount Athos so far. I don't know if it was first associated to the monastery.
Because we were wondering sometimes if the date of the construction is the same with the date of the entrance of this instrument in the monastery. For example, as we discussed with Azopardi, you know him, for example, the bell of Iviron entered in after 1730, somewhere there in the monastery. But Azopardi dates the clock much, perhaps more than one century earlier.
Well,
just only for me the most important is this information of Kovel. Yes, thank you.
The clock and the bells do not have to be always together because the bell may crack at some point, so they need a replacement. So the clock may be in fact older than the bell. A bell, if it breaks, Kovel actually has, this was not edited by Hasluk. It has one sentence in which he says that the clocks in one of the monasteries look like they've been fixed. The clock you can fix if it breaks. There are ways of more or less keeping the clock alive for a while, but a bell, if it breaks, you have to renew it. So they don't have to be the same date. The bell can come after the clock. This is one thing. Now about when the bell from Pantocrator arrived to Mount Athos, we don't know. And we don't know if it was actually first purchased by Pantocrator Monastery. And this is something that I have realized regarding the Russian bells. There are many Russian bells that were produced, cast for Skiti, and today they are used in Philotheu, Caracalou. I was told by the monks themselves that monks in the Skitis died, there was nobody, and they went and took the bells. And some of the bells have. This bell was for the Skiti, and today it's in a monastery. Yes. But I think even if the bell from Pantocrator was not actually purchased by the monastery, I believe it certainly arrived to Mount Athos soon after it was cast. I believe that all the information we have about Western bells, Venetian, shows that there is this trade, shall I say, which we can not only find on Mount Athos. Some islands from Greece, from the Cyclades, have also Venetian bells.
Alex, is this research concluded or it's still on?
So, more or less, at least I would say every monastery has 10 bells, at least. Yeah. And most of them, like maybe 80%, 70% are Russian. I don't have the skills to study this. Actually, there is, I would say, enough material from the Russian bells for a PhD. So if you know of someone who would like to study a lot of Russian inscriptions, and this was just a beginning. I couldn't measure. It's sometimes not very easy. The decoration may also yield interesting information. But I would say it's at least a beginning. I would certainly like to go back to see the other monasteries that I didn't visit.
That's my point. I think you need to spend a little more time. Anyway,
Thank you.
We thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.